First, rare earths, now energy imports from Russia and Iran. The U.S. seems to be sending mixed signals about its sincerity in trade talks with China. The two sides just wrapped up their today's latest talks in Stockholm, Sweden on Tuesday, before the U.S. talked of imposing potential punitive tariffs of up to 500% on those who import energy from Russia and Iran. And he's calling on the US's allies to follow suit on that. What's really going on? What progress, if at all, has the latest Stockholm talks achieved for bilateral trade between the world's two largest economies and the world? What to expect next? Welcome to this live edition with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Kunshan, Jiangsu province in East China by John Quelch, Executive Vice Chancellor and the American President and Distinguished Professor of Social Science at Kunshan Duke University, from the city of the trade talks, Stockholm, by Hussein Askari early in the morning, Vice Chairman of the Belt and Road Institute, and here in the studio by Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Suzhou University. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, let's refresh our memory of the timeline of the latest China-U.S. trade talks. On May the 12th, China and the U.S. reached a breakthrough consensus after their first trade meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. They agreed to cancel the 91% additional tariffs levied on each other since Trump's so-called Liberation Day. The two sides agreed to suspend 24% in additional tariffs for 90 days until August the 12th. That is, China also agreed to take measures to suspend or remove its non-tariff countermeasures. Well, we're talking about rare earth here. Secondly, on June the 5th, the two presidents, can we go back to that graph, please, graphic. On June the 5th, the two presidents spoke on the phone, and Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed that dialogue and cooperation is the only right choice. 3 days later, on June the 9th and the 10th, the two sides met in London for talks and agreed, quote-unquote, in principle, the framework for implementing consensus between the two heads of state during their phone call, as well as those reached at the Geneva talks. On June the 27th, China said the two sides had confirmed details on the framework reached in London. On June the 28th and 29th, basically ending last night, the two sides met again in Stockholm, Sweden. Now, after the meeting, Li Chenggang, China's international trade representative and Vice Minister of Commerce, had this to say. Gentlemen, let's listen in first.
双方充分认识到维护一个稳定健康的中美经贸关系的重要性。
Both sides are fully aware of the importance of safeguarding a stable and sound China-U.S. trade and economic relationship.
双方就彼此的宏观经济进行了全面、深入的交流。
Both sides had comprehensive and in-depth exchange over each other's macroeconomy.
All right, so let's get down to the topic, and I want to go to Victor first. As I mentioned in the beginning, actually, the United States, in the briefing to talk about the Stockholm talks, talked about potential punitive tariffs of up to 500% for those countries who import energy from Russia and Iran. Of course, we all know who are these countries, China being a very important importer. What exactly has been achieved? Why is the United States talking about up to 500% punitive tariffs on China?
Thank you very much for having me. On the positive side, definitely we see a lot of positive movements in Stockholm. China and the United States did have channels of communication. They can express to each other their concern and what they really want to achieve. Now, the problem is, unfortunately, the United States keeps changing the goalpost from one goal to another goal, etc., and kept bringing in extraneous things into the tariff discussions. On the tariffs themselves, actually the two sides are very close to each other, and there are no fundamental differences which would keep the two sides apart. However, when the United States insisted that China should remove all restrictions on the export of rare earth, whether it is for civilian use or for military use, well, China definitely has a different position on that. Now, when the United States kind of demanded that China should have no right to import oil and or gas from either Russia or Iran, how can China tolerate on that? How can China compromise on this major point? Because China views the energy security as part of its national security. So I think the fact that the United States keeps changing and keeps bringing in more and more extraneous things into the tariff negotiations is the wrong thing for the United States to do. Now, what is the end goal of the United States? I think it is time for the United States to specify in clear detail what exactly they want to do and what do they want to do through the tariffs.
Yeah.
And whether they want to weaponize the tariff to achieve other goals which are completely not acceptable to China. This is the moment of truth we are faced with.
Yeah, let's talk about that in just a moment. But let's get down to the superficial progress that we're hearing. According to Xinhua, that the two sides, according to the consensus between China and the United States, that the two sides will continue, quote unquote, to push for the continued extension of the pause on the 24% part of the reciprocal tariffs on the U.S. side, as well as the countermeasures on the Chinese side. This is also from China's chief trade negotiator, supposedly the outcome of this round of talks. John, let me go to you. What can we read from these words? What has been achieved, at least to the letter, on paper, during this round of talks?
Thanks very much for having me. So I think the fact that this is a third high-level round, including Secretary Bessent and Vice Premier He, this is a very good indication of the depth of commitment of both sides to resolving the very, very complex set of issues around tariffs, non-tariff barriers, export controls, etc. And so I'm very encouraged by the fact that this third round took place and that there appears to be a commitment to continuance through a further 90 days. Now, regarding the point about the oil and energy exports, this is an indication, I think, of two things. One, that there is in the mindset of Washington and especially the leadership, interlocking and interconnectedness between these various global issues. And it's not so easy, I think, for the trade issue to be segregated from other issues of significant concern. The second key point I would make is that President Trump's relationship or impression of President Putin has obviously deteriorated in recent days. And as a result of that, I think there's a mindset that now exists that the time has come to really put pressure on President Putin. And obviously one way of doing that is via cutting off the funds that are flowing into Russia as a result of the energy exports. So that I think sort of slightly explains why this has been thrown into the equation at this time.
Okay, that's your personal view. Hussein, let's get your take. What is your understanding of what has been agreed, what has been agreed, what has been attempted during this round? Because the U.S. says it's up to the president to sign it, to ratify it. So, and it doesn't even mention the Chinese side. It's as if, the two sides negotiate, say they're going to push for something, and it is up to the U.S. president to put the final word on it. That sounds to me kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I think it's always very important that nations and leaders talk to each other. This is very, very important, especially in these tense times of ours. But then we have to differentiate between the show business and the real business. The real business was expressed by the Chinese representative before the press conference with Mr. Bessent, and he said, we continue the pause and we will have 90 days and we will iron out the differences during that. I think that was the final statement. Then what Mr. Bissonnette is saying is not really so relevant, because the Chinese side has been actually very generous to the American side by not, by being accommodating to accept a compromise on the tariffs. We have to remember what happened in April, because when China retaliated in April, the whole American financial and banking system was on the verge of collapse. The bond market was in turmoil. The whole transatlantic financial and banking system was, in trouble, and that's what forced President Trump to back down and accept this negotiations series. So I think the final word is there will be a continued pause. There will be these 90 days. It will give space for both sides to get into the details of it. But I think the United States cannot afford to function without China and without Chinese, exports to the United States. And China's position has changed dramatically in the recent years, and China is in a much stronger position to negotiate with the United States. So the United States should be actually grateful that the Chinese side is willing to make these compromises.
So this round of talks, if the two sides, I'm stressing, indeed sign up on the commitment to continue the pause of the 24% part of the tariffs on each other, and that would extend the so-called tariff truce from August the 12th up to until mid-November. What would that mean for the global economy? Victor, what is your take? The temporary significance of this move, however, superficial it may be.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to make another point. I think Secretary of the Treasury, Bessent, even said one thing. He said, no, we haven't actually made the final decision. I need to go back to Washington and report everything to President Trump in the Oval Office, and until whatever President Trump decides, no, we don't have the final say.
But then he also played down the possibility that President Trump is going to say no to it. What is he trying to do?
Exactly. This is the ambiguity and the lack of certainty which are plaguing the world at large. Now, in dealing with the United States, which is the so-called only surviving superpower in the world of today, the United States will serve itself as well as the rest of the world better to project an image of reliability, trustworthiness, predictability, and certainty. But now they are tearing all these into pieces and create all this level of nervousness and uncertainty in the world. Now, the United States is congratulating itself for pulling off the trade agreements with many countries, but it is actually done by holding a gun at the head of Japan, at the head of EU, at the head of many other countries. And I don't think this is the right way to do business. And further, I think it is time to really rise up to the occasion to defend free trade. Defending free trade is not just for China's interest, it's for the interest of all the countries involved. Ironically, it is also in the interest of the majority of the people in the United States. I don't think the American people want to tear down free trade, because if you destroy free trade, you actually dig the grave for your own economy in the philosophical sense of the word. So I would say the world does not need the uncertainty and the unreliability originating from Washington. We all want to live in a world where we can respect each other, deal with each other, and trade, especially free trade, need to be protected at any cost. And for the superpower in the world to destroy free trade is really the most ironic thing in the world of today.
And China is not talking about free trade without rules, right? We're talking about within the framework of the multilateralism that was actually championed by the United States.
Absolutely.
But let's still concentrate on the kind of progress to relax the tensions, to de-escalate the tensions in terms of trade between the world's two largest economy. John, if Geneva was consensus, London was framework, what is Stockholm?
At the end of the day, I think President Trump cannot afford for there to be a reversion back to the tariff chaos that we saw earlier in the year. And the reason is very simple. If these talks fail, and if tariffs go back sky high on a reciprocal basis, it will completely disrupt stock market valuations. It will further disrupt supply chains. The disruption in supply chains will cause inflation, higher prices for consumers in the US than they're already maybe subject to. What does that mean? That means with high inflation in the US, the Federal Reserve in the US will not be willing to lower interest rates. And the one thing that President Trump needs domestically to drive economic growth is lower interest rates. So there may be brinksmanship here in Stockholm at the end game, but I believe that there is no chance of Washington allowing a return to tariff chaos.
So what are they trying to get? What do you think is the end game on the Trump part, on the Trump administration part?
I think the end game is to have what Victor has been calling for, and that is a stability in trade flows and trade arrangements in the global economy, but at a level that the U.S., rightly or wrongly, considers to be an appropriate playing field for the U.S.
Is that something achievable? Because they are precisely in the name of achieving that stability, disrupting the global trade order.
They've achieved it maybe reluctantly. They've achieved it with Japan. They've achieved it with the Philippines. They've achieved it with Indonesia. They've achieved it with the European Union. All of these countries and regions have swallowed the medicine. They may not like it, but they've swallowed it. And it remains to be seen whether or not that results in long-term distrust or long-term retribution. That's for the future to tell us.
To me, the answer is very obvious. Victor, you wanted to say something.
Well, I generally agree with what the distinguished panelist from the United States, I think, is just now saying. I think the United States really need to get to the bottom of what exactly they need to accomplish. First of all, for example, I do hope President Trump and his government will honestly and decently tell the American people that all these tariffs President Trump wants to collect will be paid, generally speaking, by the American people. Therefore, the tariffs themselves will not make America richer or wealthier or stronger. The tariff is moving money from one pocket of the American people to another pocket and recharacterize or rename it
in a funny way. It's a
tax
on the consumer, on the American
Absolutely.
consumers.
It's a new tax on the American people at large. Unless and until President Trump and his government will have that decency and honesty to tell the real truth to the American people, I don't think the United States government launching such unprecedented global tariff against the rest of the world will be on firm footing. And according to the Chinese way of understanding philosophy, if you are not on firm footing before you do anything, your endeavor will fail miserably by the end of the process. So be honest, be decent to the American people. Don't fool the American people. You can fool the American people for one day, but don't expect you can fool the American people in eternity. The tariffs will be paid by the American people, period.
Hussein, what do you make of what Victor just said? Is this a show? Is this a lie that is being repeated and it's getting bigger and bigger and more difficult to sustain? And I'm, having gone through a lot of media reports, I'm simply not sure that there have been any deal that has been reached between the United States and what it tells the world with its major trading partners. Have there really been deals? Have we seen any details? Are there any paper? Have there been real negotiations?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mr. Gao. The American president and his ministers, they want to give the impression that they are tough, they are powerful, and they get whatever they want. Actually, in Stockholm yesterday, they didn't get what they want. For example, that question of buying oil from Iran and Russia, the Chinese refused to even to talk about it. And Mr. Bessent was a bit shocked. He said the Chinese value their sovereignty very much. And he said it in the press conference. And this is very, very interesting because they don't think that nations have the right to sovereignty and independent decision making. And it was very, very clear the Chinese told Mr. Bessent they don't want to discuss China's relationship to Russia or China's relationship to Iran or any other third party. They wanted to discuss the trade with the United States, and they got what they wanted. The pause will be continued. Whatever the minister says, whatever Trump will say today, it's not relevant. On the question of making deals, even the EU-US deal was a major disaster for the European Union, for the people and companies in the European Union, if it is true. But even that deal, there are no details. There's no time frame. It created a completely chaotic situation here in Europe because nobody knows what are the details of this deal. But the Trump administration wanted to make this press conference with Mr. von der Leyen and say, oh, we reached a deal, which is very good for the American people. We don't care about other people. We only care about the United States. This is completely irresponsible. But at the end of the day, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The United States
they
is
have
not
definitely, yeah. Sorry for interrupting. They have definitely made themselves a laughingstock here in the Chinese media. I mean, the scene where the two leaders exchanged that conversation about, President Trump saying it doesn't matter whether he's a fair negotiator at all. That scene went viral among the Chinese, and for good reason.
Yeah, the world doesn't work like this anymore.
No, you can fool yourself, but not everybody else, and not all the time. But here's again, you talked about Bessent realizing China values its sovereignty very much. Is this something new? I mean, is this word sovereignty needs to be respected a new vocabulary for the Trump administration, or this is something they should and they must understand by now if they want to go forward? John.
Yeah, well,
Sorry, yeah.
So
yeah.
China is going to be the toughest nut to crack for President Trump. It's got the most leverage of any of these countries or regions. And I agree that the European Union looked like it received a very asymmetric arrangement when announced in Scotland. And I don't think Mrs. van der Leyen looked terribly comfortable at the golf course. So China is the tough one, and the United States knows that, and there is going to be further brinksmanship around this negotiation, but I'm absolutely convinced that both sides understand that getting to an agreement is important for the global economy and for each other.
I'm not sure that the United States is understanding that importance.
I still remain very optimistic that the daily uncertainties and unpredictabilities that come from publicly elected officials in Washington are not going to derail the hard work and detailed study of the economics of each pain point for each side that has gone on in Geneva, London, and Stockholm.
Yeah.
That will not be derailed. It will not be abandoned.
Sorry, John, I cannot agree totally because I don't think the U.S. side is doing their homework about the state of the Chinese economy. For instance, in the meeting, according to reports, the U.S. wanted China to shift away from a state-led export-driven manufacturing economy to be one powered by increased consumer demand, which would increase U.S. exports. They don't understand the dynamics of the Chinese economy. They didn't do their homework because the private sector, for instance, is accounting for more than half of China's overall trade value and are China's largest traders of high-tech products. They simply are not reading about what China is saying about its economy. Victor, what is your take on the U.S. idea that, first of all, it can point finger as to what China must do, and secondly, it's not doing its homework, it seems to me?
Well, fundamentally, I think it is time for the United States to realize that we do not live in a unipolar world, and the United States is not the only country that matters in the world of today. The world is indeed already a multipolar world, and countries, big or small, need to respect each other rather than any country dominating against the rest of the country, because that will be a world of the rule of the jungle rather than rule of law. So until and unless the United States will wake up to that reality, it's a pleasant reality. Even if it is an unpleasant reality from the American perspective, it is reality after all. So we hope Washington will realize to that reality, and President Trump and the US government will learn how to engage with other countries and the rest of the world on equal terms, rather than always try to impose your value, your way of thinking, your thinking onto the other countries. China will not kowtow to that kind of maximum pressure, and the rest of the world will not kowtow to that maximum pressure, even if they will be forced to swallow the unpleasant things that the distinguished American panelists just now mentioned. But I'm sure at their heart they cannot tolerate this kind of maximum pressure from Washington.
Well, on August the 1st, it is said that the Trump administration wouldn't chicken out again, that the tariffs, the additional tariffs, will go into effect for the world. And yet here we're seeing an extension of 90-day of the 24% so-called reciprocal tariffs on China. Hussein, is it going to solve the problem, kicking the can down the road? What has to be done?
No, I think, as you mentioned earlier, the U.S. side does not really understand the dynamics of the Chinese economy or the Chinese nation as their identity. Asking China to slow down its economic progress is just ridiculous. It reminds me of last year during the Olympics, a Swedish newspaper was complaining that the Chinese athletes were winning too many medals, especially in swimming and swim diving. And they said, the problem is that the Chinese athletes train too much, they exercise too much, they should slow down and allow others to win medals. And this is very ridiculous demand. China is still a developing country. It has enormous demand on progress and industrial manufacturing capacity. And China's capacity is shared with other nations through the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. Chinese industrial capacity is helping other nations to develop, building high-speed railway, building bridges, ports, tunnels, industrial parks. All these things are needed around the world. Then the United States, they just think about themselves. They don't think about, all the technology and Chinese industrial capacity that are needed in Africa and Asia and Latin America. And this is where the American side does not really understand neither the Chinese economy nor the world economy, and they're just, their self-interest comes first. And as the guest in your guest said, the American people are suffering under this policy. It's not the American people are gaining nothing from this, but they are increasing their suffering. And I think these deadlines and threats will not function. We all remember President Trump said, if he becomes president, he will end the Ukraine war in one day, he will end the Gaza war in 1 week, and get a deal with Iran. None of these has happened.
He's talking.
Strength does
but
not
he's
work.
talking. He has the social media in his at the top of his fingers, and he's tipping non-stop. So let's sober up and face the reality. Anyway, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, John Quelch, Hussein Askari, and Victor Gao for sharing with us your valuable insights. We'll keep a close watch on the situation and hope that this ridiculous game will come to an end very soon. The world is impatient of such folly. I'm Liu Xin. Thank you for watching. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.